Annette Swanson is joining us. She is the mother of Brandon Swanson, joining us from Minnesota. Thank you so much for joining us from Marshall, Minnesota, actually. First of all, I want to ask you, Ms. Swanson, you were on the phone with your son a large part of those early hours when you were trying to find him, and he was trying to find you. He wasn't hurt at all, right? I mean, the car went into a ditch, but he seemed to be okay.
Correct. He said he was fine, that he was not injured. And, you know, in fact, when we did find his vehicle, there was no damage to it. It was simply muddy from being on a gravel road, but no damage to the vehicle.
What was it like that night to be going through this and so close to your son, but so far from your son?
Yeah, you know, as you know, as Brandon tried to explain to us where his location was, and he was extremely sure of himself. He felt confident in where he was at, and that we were the ones that were confused about, you know, how to get to him. And as the conversation went on, as the minutes ticked by, you know, it came to a point where as long as Brandon was on the phone, as long as he was talking, as long as we had contact, it was okay. We would be okay. But the minute that call dropped, I just became sick. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was very, very bad. And just could hardly fathom, you know, what was happening at that point.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, to take a breath. Now, when the call just hung up like that with Brandon in dire distress, I mean, those were the words that he seemed to utter when he said, "Oh." Did you try to call him after that, and what happened?
Oh, yes, we did. You know, we didn't immediately hang up the phone. We called his name. We tried to, you know, thinking that he still had the phone, that it was very near him, that he could pick it up. He'd hear our voice, and we called out to him several times, and we realized, you know, he's not there. So we did. We called him back several times, thinking, you know, he'll see the phone light up. Even if he didn't have it on ring, he would see his phone light up when the call came in. He'd find it. You know, he'd answer the call, and it just didn't happen. Time and again, it just went unanswered.
Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. In this video, we bring you the strange case of Brandon Swanson. On the night of May 13th, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson from Marshall, Minnesota, went out with some friends to have a few drinks and some fun. It was a Tuesday night, but Brandon had just completed his first year of Minnesota West Community and Technical College that day, so he and his friends went to the nearby town of Lynn to hang out and celebrate. Between 10:30 and 11 p.m., Brandon left the friends he originally set out with and drove to another friend's house in Canby to say goodbye to yet another friend. His friends who were with him in Lynn said that when he got into his car to make the short drive, he wasn't intoxicated, and other witnesses who saw him that night all agree he was not by any means intoxicated when he arrived at the friend's house either. They said he had one shot of whiskey and then left sometime after midnight to head back to Marshall. Presumably, he was headed home at that point. The direct route from Canby to Marshall is a 30-minute drive on Highway 68. Technically, the next day, on May 14th at around 1:30 in the morning, Brandon got his car stuck in a ditch along a gravel road. He tried calling multiple friends for help, but unfortunately no one answered the calls, and Brandon remained stuck on the side of the road. Around 1:54 a.m., Brandon called his parents and told them where he was and what had happened, and asked if they could come and get him as he needed a ride home. His parents, Annette and Brian Swanson, agreed to come and pick him up and ask where he was so they knew where to go to find him. He told them he was between Marshall and Lynn, and he assured them he wasn't injured at all, but just wanted to get home. When his parents arrived at the location Brandon had given them, he wasn't there and was nowhere in sight. His mother called him on his cell phone, and the two decided to start flashing their lights to alert the other of where they were. They all assumed at this point that they must have been very close to one another, but were just missing the other somehow. Annette could hear her son flashing his lights, and she informed him she was doing the same. She told him, "We're flashing our lights, we're flashing our lights." To which Brandon replied, "Don't you see me?" Both Annette and Brandon were very frustrated at this point, and Brandon ended up hanging up on his mother. She immediately called him back with the intention of apologizing to him for getting worked up a bit herself. Brandon answered and told his mother that he could see the town's lights, referring to Lynn, and that he was just going to start walking in the direction of town. He told her to just meet him in the parking lot of a local tavern in the town of Lynn. She agreed to meet him there. As his parents drove to the tavern, they maintained contact with Brandon, with Brian staying on the phone with him. Brandon told his father he was going to cut through some fields to take a kind of shortcut and save some time on his trip since he was walking. Along the way, Brandon was telling his father over the phone what he was seeing in passing. He walked on gravel roads, saw 2 fence lines, and heard running water. About 47 minutes into the call, Brandon yelled, "Oh, shit!" and then the call disconnected. Brian Swanson later said it sounded as though his son had fallen down or possibly slipped. Brian and Annette tried repeatedly to call Brandon back, but he never answered the phone again. It would just ring and ring until sometime the next day when the calls started going straight to voicemail, and it was assumed that the phone had died. Brandon Swanson hasn't been seen or heard from since the end of that fateful call with his father that night. That same morning, May 14, 2008, Brandon's parents called the police to report him as missing. As is usually the case, the police didn't take the call very seriously and insisted that they wait a little while, as it wasn't unusual for young men Brandon's age to go missing voluntarily for a bit without telling their parents. Later on in the day, cell phone records for Brandon's phone were retrieved, and they showed his last pings were from near Porter, Minnesota, which is about 25 miles away from where he seemed to have thought he was in Lynn. There is no way the town he saw was Lynn. Shortly before noon, the authorities began their official search for Brandon. At around 12:30 p.m., his vehicle, a Chevrolet Lumina, was found in a ditch bordering the towns of Lincoln and Yellow Medicine. Lincoln County Sheriff Jack Vizecki stated that the ditch was positioned where Brandon wouldn't have been able to gain any traction to be able to drive himself out of it. There was no visible damage to the vehicle and no signs of foul play or injury at the scene. In the months following his disappearance, law enforcement conducted searches on horseback, using ATVs, and even foot searchers, but to no avail. They even utilized sniffer dogs and searched around and near several bodies of water. The dogs ended up leading their handlers to the edge of the Yellow Medicine River, which led authorities to come to the conclusion that Brandon had somehow fallen into the water. This led them to conduct extensive searches in the river, but they came up empty every time. Because of this, they then concluded that if Brandon did indeed fall into the water, he must have made his way back out of it at some point and didn't drown. They believed he just got himself out of the river and continued on his way walking. Their conclusion then was that he must have died of hypothermia due to the temperature dropping below 40 degrees on the night that he went missing. Search dogs also alerted to human remains being near Mud Creek. However, authorities never found any remains at all in this area, let alone Brandon's. Authorities believe Brandon could have been anywhere within a 122 square mile radius of the river. 10 years after he seemingly disappeared into thin air, the Yellow Medicine County Sheriff Bill Flated said, "It's a huge area. If you take that immediate area where the car was, and then the time frame when he was talking on the phone with his parents, who knows what direction he went and how far he traveled." A volunteer firefighter named Darren E. Delzer came up with his own theory as to what could have happened to Brandon. He took everything he had learned about the case and put it all together. He noted that Brandon always wore glasses because he was legally blind in his left eye. However, on the morning he went missing, he had left his glasses in his car. Based on Darren's theory, we could assume Brandon also left them in his car when he left it in the ditch to start walking to go and meet his parents, and therefore wasn't wearing them the whole time he was on the phone with his folks that night. He made a note of the fact that right before Brandon said, "Oh shit," and possibly slipped when the phone disconnected for the final time, he also said, "Not another fence." He concluded that Brandon must have fallen into an unmarked well or cistern, which are very common in rural areas like the ones where Brandon went missing. There are theories such as Brandon simply left on purpose and orchestrated the whole disappearance. This theory alleges he is living under an assumed identity somewhere. Most people don't give this theory much credit as, if you remember, Brandon was calling his parents and several friends that night, trying to find someone to help him. It makes more sense he really was trying to get help that night and not trying to purposely disappear. Theories of Brandon suffering some kind of nervous or mental breakdown also don't hold much water, as his parents say he was lucid while on the phone with them, and also that he had no history of any kind of mental illness. The initial theory that he had drowned, and the theory that followed stating that he may have made it back out of the water and then died of hypothermia, has been highly criticized as well. His phone was working for quite a while after the call with his father disconnected. It's been said that if the phone had entered the water, which it presumably would have since Brian was holding it when this theory states he went into the water, it would have immediately started going to voicemail right away, as it wasn't waterproof and would have been immediately broken. Sure, some people counter that by saying that the phone could have fallen onto the ground when Brandon slipped into the water, but if that was the case, then why was the phone never found? Remember, there were extensive searches in and around all the bodies of water in a large area surrounding where Brandon's car was found and where he alleged he was the night he went missing. So, it's safe to assume here that the phone would have been found at some point. It simply wasn't. All of the abandoned buildings in the area were also searched, and no human remains and none of Brandon's personal effects were found in any of them. This discredits the theory that Brandon might have sought refuge and shelter in one of them and died some other way while inside. Yet another theory is that perhaps Brandon was involved in a hit and run or otherwise abducted, and that his remains were disposed of by the perpetrators. However, there is no evidence at all to prove this theory or that foul play was involved in any way in Brandon's case. Brandon's parents believe their son's disappearance might have been solved had police immediately started investigating instead of telling them to wait it out for a while. There is no law that says there needs to be a waiting period for someone to be able to be reported as missing. However, unofficially of course, priority is usually given to cases where foul play is obvious, where people are mentally or physically impaired, and when younger children are involved. A missing 18-year-old who had disappeared after a night out drinking with some friends just didn't seem too important to the police until hours after the fact, and so much precious time had been wasted. Annette and Brian Swanson proposed a law be written up in their son's name, Brandon's Law, which would, quote, require law enforcement to take a missing persons report without delay after notification of someone missing under dangerous circumstances, no matter the missing person's age. Immediately conduct a preliminary investigation to determine if the person is missing and whether the person is endangered, and promptly notify all other law enforcement agencies of the situation, end quote. Brandon's Law, which was sponsored by former House Minority Leader Marty Seifert and Senator Dennis Frederickson, was signed into law by Minnesota's then-governor, Tim Pawlenty, on May 7, 2009. The law officially went into effect on July 1, 2009. This still leaves one very big question, though. What happened to Brandon Swanson? How could he have been so off about where he was when he was telling his parents he was near Lynn and they were flashing their lights at each other, but not seeing one another? What led him to yell the expletive into the phone and hang up? Why wasn't his phone or any of his other belongings ever found? There has literally been no trace of him since the last time he was heard shouting into the phone that fateful night. Hello, friends. Welcome to our latest video. Today, we're going to be discussing the frightening disappearance of Tara Calico. Now, many times in this community, we come across cases that are so incredibly baffling. We struggle with our humanity and wondering how something like this could actually happen. While we cover hundreds of cases on this channel of people who have gone missing, some who have been found unfortunately deceased, and still others who no trace at all has ever been found. As they say, the devil is in the details. It's the smallest detail sometimes that can either make or break a case, or that can leave us scratching our heads and being even more confused than when we first started out. The disappearance of Tara Calico is one of those cases where you kind of feel like you're right on the brink of having the answers, only to find the next bit of information bringing you right back around to the beginning. Right back at square one. This sad and frightening case is one of thousands where the person was abducted and never seen or heard from again. However, it's the little clues along the way which make this case stand out so much. Tara Calico was from Belen, New Mexico, and this is where her home was when she left it on the morning of September 30th, 1988. Tara was 19 years old at the time and had her whole life ahead of her. She had no idea that when she went out for her usual bike ride at 9:30 that morning, it would turn out to be the last time she would ever see her home again. Her mother rode with her in the mornings up until very recently, when she felt the two were being stalked by passing motorists and was too scared to continue on these morning rides with her daughter. This would be a strange and sad coincidence, and foreboding that neither mother nor daughter had any idea would be so relevant and possibly close to the truth until it was too late. As far as they were concerned, this day was no different than all the rest. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, or so it seemed. Tara refused the mace her mother suggested she carry along with her following the alleged stalker incident, and insisted her mother was just being paranoid. Tara had a date to play tennis with her boyfriend at 12:30 that afternoon and asked her mother to come and pick her up if she wasn't home by noon. When 11:30 hit and still no sign of Tara, her mother, Patty, set out to go and pick her up as planned. She drove the usual route, but this time Tara was nowhere to be found. This was long before the days of cell phones, so Patty wasn't able to just call her daughter and ask where she was or why she wasn't where she was supposed to be. However, this was immediately concerning for Patty, and she contacted the authorities pretty much right away and reported her daughter as missing. As they investigated further and searched along the route Tara was known to have been riding that day, they found pieces of her Sony Walkman and a cassette tape. Though there was no way of knowing for sure that these items belonged to Tara, the family were pretty convinced as they knew what her belongings looked like. Tara was a creature of habit and brought along the same Walkman cassette player and tape with her almost every single day. Tara's family believed that she might have purposely dropped these items to not only mark her trail, but to alert whoever came looking for her that she was in some kind of danger. After all, there would be no other reason for her to have just left her stuff broken and lying on the side of the road. During the investigation, several people came forward and said that they had indeed seen Tara that morning, riding her bicycle along the route where her items were later found. Her bicycle, to this day, has never been located. No one witnessed her presumed abduction, however, and there weren't many clues other than the people who claimed to have seen her and the broken Walkman scattered around the area where she was last seen by several passers-by. There were several witnesses who said they saw a light-colored 1953 Ford pickup truck with a camper shell following her, but the authorities were never able to locate the owner of the vehicle. It's unknown whether or not it is connected to Tara's disappearance. Tara's case went cold fairly quickly, and her family and loved ones were left with no answers, and the perpetual fear that Tara would be found deceased somewhere, along with the perpetual hope that she would once again come walking through the front door someday. That brings us to June of 1989, when it seemed that new life was breathed back into the case, when terrifying new evidence was possibly found in the parking lot of a convenience store in Port St. Joe, Florida. A photograph was lying on the ground between two vehicles. The woman who found the photo said it was found in the parking space of where a white windowless Toyota cargo van, driven by a man with a mustache believed to be in his 30s, was parked when she arrived at the store. However, despite the police setting up roadblocks in an attempt to intercept the vehicle, the man was never caught nor brought to interrogation. The picture in question was a Polaroid, which shows a little boy and a young woman, both bound and gagged and with terrified looks on their faces. Because of the duct tape and the gags in their mouth, it was hard to tell who the image was of. It was theorized by investigators, however, that the young woman in the photo was Tara Calico, and that the boy was Michael Henley, also of New Mexico, who had disappeared in April of 1988. According to investigators, the picture had to have been taken after May 1989 because the particular film used in the photograph was not available until then. The identification of the boy in the photograph as Michael Henley seems unlikely because his remains were discovered in 1990 in the Zuni Mountains, about 7 miles from his family's campsite where he had originally disappeared, and 75 miles from where Tara Calico disappeared. There was much back and forth and conjecture about this Polaroid, but in the end, the standing ruling is that it was not him in the picture. Police believe he simply wandered off and sadly died of exposure to the elements. Tara's mother, Patty, believed that the girl in the picture was in fact her daughter, though. This positive identification was mainly made due to a scar the woman in the photo had on her leg, which, according to Patty, was identical to one Tara had in the same exact spot on her leg. Tara had received this particular scar due to an injury she suffered from a car accident when she was younger. In addition, a paperback copy of V.C. Andrews' novel, My Sweet Audrina, said to be one of Tara Calico's favorite books, can be seen lying next to the woman. Scotland Yard analyzed the photo and concluded that the woman was Tara, but a second analysis by the Los Alamos National Laboratory disagreed. An FBI analysis of the photo was inconclusive. This is where the case seems to take an even more bizarre turn. 20 years after the discovery of the photograph, which was of course widely shared by media at the time, pictures of a little boy were sent to the Port St. Joe police chief, David Barnes. He received 2 letters, postmarked June 10th and August 10th, 2009, from Albuquerque, New Mexico. One letter contained a photo, printed on copy paper, of a young boy with sandy brown hair. Someone had drawn a black band in ink on the photo over the boy's mouth, as if it were covered in tape, like in the 1989 Polaroid. It seems whoever sent the photos was alluding to the fact that the boy in the original photograph, found all of those years ago, was Michael Henley after all. This has never been officially confirmed, however. The second letter contains an original image of the boy. On August 12th, the Star newspaper in Port St. Joe received a third letter, also postmarked in Albuquerque on August 10th, and depicting the same image of a boy with black marker drawn over his mouth. None of the letters contained a return address or a note indicating the child's identity, making the officials there believe it may have something to do with the disappearance of Tara Calico. The letters were sent in around the same time a self-proclaimed psychic called the detective about Tara, saying she had met a runaway in California with whom she worked in a strip club with, who eventually wound up murdered. The caller said she had dreams suggesting the runaway may have been Tara Calico, and that she may be buried somewhere in California. Though it was a long shot and there was no real location given publicly as to where this alleged psychic said the girl could possibly be buried, the police must have had some additional information as they did conduct searches, and reported that the searches led to nothing and no bodies at all were found, not of Tara Calico or anyone else. Additionally, these photos were given to the FBI for further investigation in hope of finding fingerprints or possible DNA evidence. 20 years after she disappeared that fateful day in September of 1988, the sheriff of Valencia County, California at the time, Rene Rivera, reported that he had received what he believed to be credible information that finally explained what had happened to Tara. This information alleged that some boys who knew her drove up behind her in a truck and some form of car accident followed. Tara later died, and those responsible covered up the crime. Rivera states he knows the names of those involved, but that, without a body, he can't make a case. He hasn't released whatever evidence has led him to this conclusion. No arrests have been made, and the case remains open. Tara's stepfather, John Doyle, has disputed these claims, saying that the sheriff should not have made these comments if he was not willing to arrest anyone, and that strong circumstantial evidence should be enough for conviction. 2 other Polaroid photographs, possibly of Tara, have surfaced over the years. The first was found near a construction site in Montecito, California, and in a blurry photo of a girl's face with tape covering her mouth and light blue striped fabric behind her, similar to that on the pillow in the Toyota van photo. It was taken on film that was not available until June 1989. The second photo shows a woman loosely bound in gauze, her eyes covered with more gauze and large black framed glasses, with a male passenger beside her on an Amtrak train. For this photo, the film used was not available until February 1990. Tara's mother believed the first one was Tara but thought that the second may have been some kind of sick joke. Her sister stated, "They had a striking, uncalming resemblance. As for me, I will not rule them out. But keep in mind our family has had to identify many other photographs, and all but those three were ruled out." In October 2013, a 6-person task force was established to reinvestigate the disappearance. As of 2017, no arrest had been made and the case remained open. On October 1st, 2019, the FBI announced that they are offering a reward of up to $20,000 for precise details leading to the identification or location of Tara Lee Calico and information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for her disappearance. In September 2021, the Valencia County Sheriff's Office and the New Mexico State Police issued a statement that they have a new lead in the case and that the focus of a sealed warrant for an unknown private residence located within Valencia County has been issued. However, no further details were provided, and there have been no additional updates since that time. So, what happened to Tara Calico? Is it possible some boys she knew, possibly from her neighborhood or school, decided to try and scare her but took it too far and accidentally ran her over and killed her, leading them to then having to cover it up and get rid of her body and bicycle, as Sheriff Rivera believes? If this is the case, then why wasn't the witness or witnesses who allegedly came forward to him with this information been called in to testify? As Tara's stepfather stated, the circumstantial evidence should have been enough for conviction. Is it possible that her mother was right and perhaps someone had been stalking the two of them and saw Tara alone, deciding to take the opportunity to abduct her right there on the side of the road? Were any of the bizarre photographs handed in actually of Tara? What was the new lead in the case back in 2019, and why has nothing ever come of this alleged search warrant on the private residence? These are questions we hope one day will be answered. If for nothing else, then that Tara's family could at least begin to heal. Maybe one day justice will be served, and the facts of what happened to young Tara Calico all those years ago, when she was simply going for a bike ride and listening to some of her favorite music in her Walkman, will come to light, and someone will be held accountable. As always, we'll bring you any updates that come to light as soon as we receive them. Hello friends, Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to our latest video. Today's episode, we're going to bring you the strange vanishing of a filmmaker in the woods. Now, we've previously covered this case in one of our compilations, but today we're going to do a little deeper dive. Join me. Let's take a walk and see. The woods can be a beautiful and mystifying place where all sorts of wonder and fun seem to call us sometimes, and when we hear that call, most of us can't help but heed it. What happens, though, when it's darkness beckoning to us out there in those densely wooded and oftentimes civilizationless places? And at the end of the day, we still can't resist the urge to go. They say that the hours or even days leading up to a person's disappearance will give investigators at least an inkling as to what could have possibly happened to a person. And it's true that in most missing person cases, even those without an official ending, they all have some sort of order to them. As in, the person did this for this reason, and then did that for that reason, and then something happened. Every once in a while, though, we come across something truly bizarre and a real-life mystery when someone does something baffling and unexplainable right before they vanish off the face of the earth, never to be seen or heard from again, and leaving everyone scratching their heads as to what could have led the person to behave in such a strange manner, most often completely inconsistent with how they presented themselves day to day to the people around them. Folks, here's one of those cases. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Terrence Woods Jr., at just 26 years old, had made quite the name for himself with his quick success as a filmmaker. Though educated in England, he was a resident of Capitol Heights, Maryland, in the United States. He worked on many documentary-type films and numerous TV programs, some of which had him traveling to and working in exotic places like Turkey and Alaska, and in these places he would be even more secluded, sometimes out in the field filming in the farthest flung parts of these respective places. He was not only used to the great outdoors, but also used to working in the strenuous conditions they often provided, and was said to never even break a sweat when he would find out the next far out-of-the-way place he would be shooting. He loved the adventure and the rush of it all. He definitely wasn't opposed or a stranger to roughing it out there, and 2018 was no exception. Terrence was working for the London-based production company called Raw TV, who we in the States may know best for their show on the Discovery Channel called Gold Rush. In October of that same year, he was asked to go out into the wilderness of Montana and Idaho for a few weeks to work on a documentary for the British show Whitewater. The episode he would be filming for was one about a place in the heart of north-central Idaho in the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest, and, more specifically, a sort of well-known and somewhat legendary abandoned gold mine called Penman Mine. Terrence was one of 13 crew members, including himself, and at first things seemed to be going fine and everything was totally normal. He was said to be in good spirits and nothing was out of the ordinary with him or really at all. At first, that is. It didn't take long, though, for things to take a somewhat remarkable turn for the bizarre and strange, specifically regarding Terrence Woods Jr. On October 5th, 2018, the entire crew was at the mine filming for the whole day. Terrence and other members of the crew were experienced and fully equipped to handle the rugged and somewhat treacherous mountainous terrain. Most of the crew chalked Terrence's being unusually quiet that day to tiredness, as they were all feeling a little exhausted after spending the whole day out in this isolated and abandoned and somewhat unfamiliar place. When they were done filming, and as they began to pack everything up for that day, Terrence would suddenly, and seemingly out of nowhere, do something very strange that no one could explain or make any sense of. He was having a conversation with one of the miners, and, according to a witness who later came forward and gave a statement as to what he had seen transpire, Terrence excused himself from that conversation by saying that he had to go and answer the call of nature. Our witness watched from a nearby van, and here's what he also reported. He says that out of nowhere, he was struck with this seemingly random and strange gut feeling to look over to the cliff where Terrence had just been standing. That's when he says he noticed that Terrence wasn't there. All that was left was a radio that he had been using, just left there on the ground. The witness said he immediately jumped out of the van and ran over to the cliff because he thought Terrence had somehow accidentally fallen off of it. He was shocked to discover, though, as he stood there looking down over this extremely high cliff, that Terrence was already approximately 15 feet down it, and that he hadn't fallen, but had taken off running. He remembered thinking that he had never in his life seen anyone run that fast. He turned and yelled to some other crew members, telling them all to get into a van and drive down to the main road. The idea was to cut Terrence off at this road and find out what in the world was going on. The witness took off running after his friend. He was calling out, but Terrence didn't even look back. This witness had extensive search and rescue training and stopped his pursuit for fear that if Terrence were for whatever reason scared, chasing after him could make him even more fearful. It was a very confusing scene. He said that when he had finally gotten back up the cliff, the crew who had driven to the main road to cut Terrence off hadn't seen him. It was as though he had blinked out of existence somewhere between where the witness had left him and where the main road was. The witness further claims the crew then searched, and once they found a house with a telephone, they called for help and reported Terrence as missing. Terrence had taken his cell phone with him when he took off running, but he'd left behind his two-way radio and his backpack containing all of his belongings. He had no supplies, and even though he had his cell phone, there was no service out there in the middle of nowhere. By the time authorities showed up, it was nearly dark, and everyone was concerned as to how he would survive overnight. A preliminary search of the immediate area was conducted, but when nothing useful was found, due to how dark it was out there, the search would be halted until first light in the morning. Overnight that night, a fresh sheet of snow had fallen, but during the search, which consisted of helicopters, search dogs, and infrared camera technology, not even a footprint was found, and no one was any closer to figuring out what in the world had happened to Terrence Woods Jr. by the end of the first search day. The search team member even stated, quote, "It's as if he had never been there at all," end quote. After a week, the official search was called off, but not without some very bizarre clues that would surface. First, it was found that, though his job called for him to be in Idaho until sometime in mid-November, Terrence had recently sent a text message to his father informing him that he would be returning home on October 10th. He did not elaborate as to why he would be cutting his trip short, and Terrence had never before left a job early, regardless of circumstances, location, or anything else for that matter. After speaking to some of his friends and family, investigators found that Terrence had been extremely anxious over this shoot. This was something else that had never happened before. He loved the outdoors and he loved his job, so he never had any problems or issues with getting the work done, regardless of what it took. His behavior and anxiety about it was enough to raise some eyebrows and make his loved ones feel the investigators should know about it after the fact. Indeed, in the weeks leading up to the shoot, Terrence had told those closest to him that he didn't even want to go on the trip, but again, he didn't elaborate as to why he felt this way, and everyone just let it go and thought nothing more of it until after his disappearance. It was extremely strange, all this sudden anxiety and being unsure, as the only thing he is said to have loved more than his job were the adventures in the places that it often took him, these strange and exotic, though oftentimes isolated places. His sister, Sharnia Tisdale, disagrees with the other's narrative, however, and said that she spoke to her brother right before he left, and he seemed absolutely fine to her. She stated that the whole situation seemed somehow unusual to her, and that since she wasn't there and all she had to go on was what the other crew who were with him that day were saying, she didn't really know what to think. She claimed she and Terrence spoke often, and that they told each other basically everything. So if there was something wrong or something bothering Terrence, he would have certainly mentioned it to her, and further elaborated on it. She says, though, he didn't. She disagrees that he was anxious leading up to the trip, and also that he was expressing disinterest in going at all. She stated, quote, "He's traveled around the world. He really likes to do TV. He's a loving person and caring and all-around good person," end quote. On the first morning of their first day filming, Terrence had done something which at the time his father hadn't thought anything more of, but in retrospect said it seemed rather eerie when all was said and done. It seems Terrence had sent him a text message of some video footage, which was described as creepy, of a river flowing through the canyon. There was no text or explanation as to why he was sending this or what it was supposed to mean. It was brought up afterwards that Terrence and the production manager weren't seeing eye to eye on some things and had been having some disagreements, but it's not known if this is or isn't connected to his disappearance. The family orchestrated searches utilizing volunteers and posted flyers with Terrence's picture all over the region. Hope quickly faded, however, that he had made it out of the area alive, mainly due to the harsh and heavy snowfall that had almost immediately upon his vanishing rolled through the expanse. His family and those closest to him said that Terrence had absolutely no history of any sort of mental illness either, and everyone was completely baffled as to why he just up and ran down the cliff that way, never looking back. Admittedly, it would be fairly easy to get lost or turned around in this particular area of mountainous and treacherous terrain, but the question still remains of what in the world made him run in the first place. Was he running towards something, or was he running away from it? If it was either of those things, then what exactly was he running to or from? Unfortunately, no one knows the answers to these questions still to this day, and Terrence Woods Jr. has never been seen or heard from again, and no remains or further evidence or clues have ever surfaced. His family have since theorized that perhaps he was either fearful of one or more of the crew members there with him that day, or fearful due to the actions of the same. Authorities have ruled out this theory, though, or any theory stating that someone else on the crew is involved, and have been adamant that there is absolutely no sign whatsoever of foul play. They believe that he had suffered some sort of random mental breakdown and either just randomly up and booked it down the cliff, or that he had long been planning to take his own life out there where he knew nobody would easily find him. However, we would like to point out that none of this is in keeping with Terrence's usual personality or mental and medical history. The only option left, at least to those of us who have seen situations like this before, albeit not very often, is what Sir Arthur Conan Doyle once stated: "When you have eliminated all which is impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Could some otherworldly, paranormal, or even extraterrestrial force have been at play here? Could he have been lured out there into the woods somewhere and then possibly passed through a portal of some sort? Obviously, this is just speculation, and there isn't and could be no evidence for this one way or the other. But it is something we should all consider. Given what we know on this channel, about what's happening all over the world in national parks and forested and wooded areas. Could Terrence have been super sensitive to these types of things and perhaps saw something that no one else could? Did he see something only meant for him to see? We just don't know. And Terrence's loved ones still struggle with the details of the disappearance and the overall vanishing in general. His father has allegedly accused the police of not properly investigating the case due to alleged racism. However, the police stand by their statement that they did all they could and did exactly what they would have done for anyone in the same circumstance. We now leave it up to you. What do you think happened to Terrence Woods Jr. on that day back in October 2018 when he suddenly seemingly went from a perfectly normal, rather successful filmmaker to another missing person who seemingly vanished into thin air and without a trace under very strange and bizarre circumstances? His world and the world of those closest to him changed literally in the blink of an eye. And not knowing the why or how of that has got to be one of the most painful and frustrating things in the world for his family.
Today, the search picking back up to find a field geologist who's been missing for more than a month now.
Daniel Robinson has been missing for nearly 2 months.
It has been 3 months since a Valley man went missing.
A man who disappeared in neighboring Arizona nearly 3 months ago is still nowhere to be found. 24-year-old Daniel Robinson's car was found along with some of his belongings, but no sign of Daniel. And then a human skull was discovered near the car, but that only raised more questions when testing showed it didn't belong to him.
Hello, friends. Today, we're going to be looking into the strange disappearance of Daniel Robinson. Daniel Robinson, 24-year-old geologist from Columbia, South Carolina, has been missing since he was last seen leaving a job site in the area of Sun Valley Parkway and Cactus Road on June 23, 2021. Later that day, he was reported missing, and nobody has seen or heard from him since. Daniel graduated from the College of Charleston in South Carolina with a degree in geology in 2018. A missing persons flyer was released to the public, and investigators of the Buckeye Police Department began speaking with friends and family to determine where Robinson may have gone. According to loved ones and those who knew him best, there was no indications that Daniel had wanted to leave his life behind or harm himself in any way. However, it was also stated to be very unlike him to not have told anyone why he was leaving the job site in the middle of the day or where he was going. Cell phone and financial records have provided no indication of Robinson's possible whereabouts, according to the police. Robinson was last seen driving his 2017 Jeep Renegade, heading west further into the desert area of Sun Valley Parkway, just north of Cactus Road in Buckeye. While reviewing phone records, investigators did notice a single ping that came from his cell phone, but there was no available data as to the location because, as they stated, the phone was either out of range or turned off. It did not appear as though Daniel had made any calls or texts after leaving the job site on that fateful June day, however. On the 19th of July, a rancher who owned property about 4 miles southwest from the job site where Daniel was last seen made a call to police and reported having found what looked like Daniel's Jeep on his property, wrecked and abandoned. Daniel was nowhere around as far as the man could tell. It was determined fairly quickly to indeed be Daniel's Jeep, and it's how it was found that was very concerning. It was stuck in a deep ravine with significant damage and appeared to have rolled and landed on its side, Buckeye police said at that time, adding that Robinson's cell phone, wallet, keys, and clothing were all found at the scene. The vehicle's airbags had also deployed. The Buckeye Police Department also stated that because of the rough terrain, the vehicle was not clearly visible to crews searching by air and on foot. The detectives in charge of the case immediately began an official and thorough search around the area where the vehicle was found. They employed search dogs, aerial helicopter searches, and even search by foot, all to no avail. Daniel Robinson, it seems, had disappeared without a trace. Police reported that they had searched an area of more than 70 square miles, together with outside agencies, and utilized ATVs, cadaver dogs, a helicopter, and even a drone. Although no further evidence of Daniel or even a hint as to what happened to him other than the wrecked vehicle was found anywhere. In a statement issued after the initial search, Buckeye police added that, based on the personal effects found in Daniel's vehicle, no foul play is suspected. However, Daniel's family and the private investigator that they've hired disagree. For one, the private investigator believes that Daniel's Jeep had been crashed several times in different locations before coming to rest on its side in the ravine. Another thing that they found extremely suspicious is that the very clothes Daniel was wearing, every single item, was found in a pile mere feet away from his crashed Jeep. On July 31st, there was a human skull found a bit south of the area where his Jeep was recovered, but it was later forensically determined to not be that of Daniel Robinson. No further human remains of any kind were found in the search area or around the area where the skull was found. Daniel had recently moved to Phoenix for work, and it wasn't at all unusual for the job to have him working on sites in remote desert locations, often in extreme conditions. His father, David Robinson II, has traveled from his home in South Carolina to continue the search for his son and for answers as to what happened. He's also set up a GoFundMe page to pay for a private investigator, along with flyers, continued searches, and other expenses. In mid-July, Daniel's father claimed that the Buckeye Police Department stopped putting in the necessary effort. He even began organizing search parties of his own and brought in his own private investigator and forensic analysis team. He's launched 2 websites and a Twitter page to help streamline the project. David Robinson's efforts are ongoing, with a volunteer party set to conduct a search on October 2nd. He is still calling on the Buckeye Police Department to revamp their efforts and conduct a more thorough investigation into Daniel's disappearance. Daniel Robinson is described as 5'8" with black hair and brown eyes, and is missing a right forearm and hand. Anyone with information can submit tips via Robinson's website, which you can find in the description, or by contacting the Buckeye Police Department at 623-349-6400. Well, there you have it, folks. What do you think of this strange disappearance? Why would Daniel shed all his clothing and take off into the desert? Did he perhaps have a head injury? Or was he forced to do this by someone else? Was this purely an accident, or was there something more nefarious going on? Why would Daniel suddenly leave a job site in the middle of work? At this time, none of this makes any sense. I look forward to reading your comments, but we do ask that you please keep it friendly and respectful. Many times, the family and friends of these missing persons watch these videos and read the comment section. Please don't say anything you wouldn't want to read if this was your friend or family member, loved one being discussed. In the meanwhile, be good to yourselves and each other. Be careful out there. I'll see you just a little farther on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.